The morning sun painted the California coastline in shades of gold as Sarah Mitchell bent down to examine a particularly beautiful abalone shell. The Pacific waves rolled gently onto the sand at Camp Pendleton's restricted beach access, a privilege she'd earned through her work as a marine biology consultant for the base. Her canvas bag already held dozens of specimens she'd collected for her research on coastal erosion patterns. Sarah had been walking this stretch of beach for 3 years now, ever since the Marine Corps had contracted her small environmental consulting firm to study the impact of training exercises on local marine ecosystems. At 32, she had built a reputation as one of the most thorough researchers on the West Coast, though her unassuming appearance often led people to underestimate her capabilities. She wore faded jeans, hiking boots, and a simple gray sweatshirt that morning. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her only accessories were a pair of worn sunglasses and a collection bag slung across her shoulder. To any casual observer, she looked like just another beachcomber enjoying the early morning solitude. What those casual observers couldn't see was the intense focus in her green eyes as she methodically cataloged each shell, noting GPS coordinates, and taking detailed photographs. They couldn't know about her doctorate in marine biology from UC San Diego or her published research on Pacific Coast biodiversity. Most importantly, they had no idea about the hobby that had consumed her weekends for the past 15 years. Sarah straightened up and shielded her eyes against the rising sun, scanning the horizon where a cargo ship moved slowly southward. She automatically calculated the distance and wind conditions, habits ingrained from countless hours at shooting ranges across 3 states. Her father had introduced her to competitive shooting when she was 12, and she'd never lost her love for the precision and mental discipline it required. The sound of approaching footsteps on the sand made her turn. 2 men in military fatigues were walking toward her, their conversation audible in the morning quiet. One was clearly American, tall, and lean with the confident bearing of special forces. The other spoke with a crisp British accent, his posture equally military, but with the slight swagger that marked him as foreign special operations. "I'm telling you, Matthews, that shot at 29 palms was pure luck," the British soldier was saying. "No way you could replicate it under field conditions." The American, whose name tape read Garrett, shook his head with a grin. "Luck nothing, Davies. That was 1,100 meters in a crosswind. I've been making shots like that since before you learned to spell sniper." Sarah continued collecting shells, but her attention was caught by their discussion. She recognized the competitive banter of serious marksmen, the same kind of good-natured rivalry she'd heard at shooting competitions across the country. 1,100 meters? Davies laughed. "That's barely past intermediate range for a proper rifle. Back at Hereford, we regularly engage targets at 1,500 plus. Right. And I suppose you've personally made shots at that distance?" Garrett challenged. "Matter of fact, I have. Longest confirmed was 1820 meters. Afghanistan, 2019. Sarah tried to focus on a particularly intricate shell pattern, but found herself estimating the distance to various landmarks along the beach. The old pier jutting into the water was roughly 800 meters from her position. The lighthouse on the distant point was probably close to 3,000. She developed an almost unconscious ability to judge distances, a skill that had served her well in both her research work and her shooting hobby. The 2 soldiers had stopped about 20 feet away from her, their conversation growing more animated. Garrett pulled out his phone and began showing Davies something on the screen. "See this grouping? 5 shots at 1,200 meters, all within a 6-inch circle." Davies examined the phone with professional interest. "Not bad for an American. Though I notice you're using match-grade ammunition. Try that with standard military loads, and see how you do." "Standard loads are for standard soldiers," Garrett replied. "We use what gets the job done." Their debate continued as Sarah worked her way along the waterline. She found herself drawn into their technical discussion despite trying to maintain her focus on shell collecting. They were clearly both accomplished marksmen, their knowledge of ballistics and field conditions evident in every exchange. Davies gestured toward the lighthouse in the distance. "Now that would be a proper test. I'd estimate that lighthouse at 3,000 meters, give or take." Sarah glanced up from her collection bag. 3,285 meters, she said quietly. Then immediately regretted speaking. Both men turned to look at her with surprise. Davies raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I've just been working on this beach for a few years, and I've measured most of the landmarks for my research. Garrett studied her with new interest. You measured it? How? Laser rangefinder mostly, cross-referenced with GPS coordinates and topographical surveys. Sarah hefted her collection bag nervously. I'm a marine biologist. I do consulting work for the base. Davies looked skeptical. And you just happened to measure the distance to a lighthouse. I measure everything, Sarah admitted with a slight smile. It's kind of an occupational hazard. Water temperature, tidal variations, sediment composition, distance between reference points. Data collection is what I do. The two soldiers exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. There was something calculating in their expressions, the way she imagined they might study a target before taking a shot. 3,285 meters, Garrett repeated slowly. That's quite specific. Plus or minus 2 meters, accounting for measurement error and equipment calibration, Sarah added. Then, mentally kicked herself for sounding like a textbook. Davies stepped closer, his curiosity clearly piqued. You seem to know a fair bit about precision measurement. Ever done any shooting yourself? Sarah hesitated. Her shooting hobby wasn't exactly secret, but she'd learned to be cautious about mentioning it. Too many people made assumptions about women who could handle firearms, and not all of those assumptions were positive. A little, she said finally. Mostly target shooting. It's just a weekend hobby. What kind of distances? Garrett asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Depends on the range. Usually out to 600 or 700 meters. Both soldiers looked genuinely surprised now. Davies let out a low whistle. 700 meters? That's serious long-range work. What rifle do you shoot? Sarah found herself relaxing slightly as the conversation turned technical. These men clearly respected marksmanship regardless of who was behind the rifle. I have a custom Remington 700.300 Winchester Magnum. Built it myself over about 6 months. Built it yourself? Garrett's eyebrows shot up. You do your own gunsmithing? My father taught me when I was younger. He was a competitive shooter before he retired. Sarah adjusted her collection bag strap. I started helping him work on rifles when I was in high school, and just kept learning. Davies crossed his arms, studying her with new interest. Custom .300 Win Mag at 700 meters. What kind of groups are you shooting? On a good day, sub-MOA out to 600. Beyond that, it depends on conditions. The two soldiers exchanged another look, this one filled with what looked like growing respect and perhaps a hint of competitive interest. Sub-MOA at 600 meters, Davies mused. That's better than half the snipers I've worked with. Sarah felt a flush of pride at the compliment, but tried to keep her expression neutral. I've had good training and a lot of practice. My father was pretty demanding about fundamentals. Garrett studied the lighthouse in the distance, then looked back at Sarah with a speculative expression. You know, we were just having a friendly debate about long-range marksmanship. Hypothetically speaking, do you think that lighthouse distance would be achievable with the right equipment and conditions? Sarah followed his gaze, automatically calculating wind patterns and atmospheric conditions. The morning air was relatively still, with only a light breeze coming off the ocean. Visibility was excellent, with clear skies and good light. Theoretically, she said carefully, with the right rifle, optics, and ammunition, it's within the realm of possibility. You'd need to account for significant bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients. The bigger challenge would be target acquisition and maintaining a stable shooting position. Davies nodded appreciatively, spoken like someone who understands ballistics. Most people think long-range shooting is just point and shoot. There's a lot of math involved, Sarah agreed. Bullet flight time alone at that distance would be several seconds. Any movement in wind conditions between trigger pull and impact could throw the shot significantly off target. Garrett's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it briefly. We've got some time before we need to report back. Davies here thinks American snipers are all talk and no substance. And I maintain that British precision is superior to American volume of fire, Davies replied with a grin. Sarah sensed something building in their conversation, a competitive tension that was moving beyond simple bragging rights. She'd seen the same dynamic at shooting competitions, where friendly rivalry could quickly escalate into serious challenges. Sounds like you both have something to prove, she observed. Actually, Davies said slowly, I was just thinking the same thing. We have access to some very nice equipment back at the range. Long-range precision rifles, high-quality optics, match-grade ammunition. Garrett caught on immediately. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? A proper test of skill. That lighthouse makes an interesting target, assuming we can set up something visible at that distance. Sarah realized where this conversation was heading and felt her pulse quicken. She dreamed about attempting shots at extreme distances, but had never had access to the kind of military-grade equipment these men were discussing. You'd need spotters, wind measurement equipment, probably multiple rifles to account for different approaches to the problem, she said, her scientific mind automatically working through the logistics. We have all of that, Garrett confirmed. The question is whether we can find anyone skilled enough to make such a shot worthwhile. Davies looked directly at Sarah. I don't suppose you'd be interested in observing a demonstration of military marksmanship? Purely in the interest of scientific curiosity, of course. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. This was clearly more than simple observation they were suggesting, though they were being diplomatically indirect about it. I'd be very interested in seeing how military precision shooting differs from civilian competition, she said carefully. Excellent, Garrett said with a grin that suggested he knew exactly what kind of challenge was taking shape. I think this could be a very educational morning for all of us. As the three of them began walking back toward the base facilities, Sarah clutched her bag of shells and wondered what she had just gotten herself into. The lighthouse stood silent in the distance, waiting. The Marine Corps shooting range at Camp Pendleton was unlike any facility Sarah had ever seen. As they walked through the security checkpoint, she marveled at the sophisticated equipment and infrastructure designed for precision marksmanship training. Concrete shooting positions extended out in a line, each equipped with adjustable benches, wind measurement devices, and communication equipment. Davies and Garrett had made several phone calls during their walk back to base, and Sarah gathered that they'd arranged for access to specialized long-range equipment. Their casual morning debate had transformed into something more serious, though she still wasn't entirely sure what role she was expected to play. The range officer approved our request for extended distance shooting, Garrett explained as they approached a building marked equipment issue. We'll have access to some very nice rifles and optics. A grizzled staff sergeant emerged from the building carrying two large cases. Gentlemen, and ma'am, he nodded to Sarah. You've got some beautiful equipment to work with today. 2.338 Lapua Magnum rifles, Schmidt and Bender optics, match-grade ammunition, and all the support gear you requested. Sarah's eyes widened as the cases were opened to reveal precision rifles that represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship technology. The .338 Lapua Magnum was legendary among long-range shooters, capable of maintaining accuracy at distances that would challenge the most skilled marksmen. These are incredible, she breathed, her scientific curiosity overriding her nervousness. I've read about this cartridge, but never seen one in person. Davies lifted one of the rifles with practiced ease. Excellent choice for extreme long-range work. Significantly more powerful than your .300 Win Mag, with better ballistic coefficients and retained energy at distance. The staff sergeant handed Garrett a tablet loaded with ballistic calculation software. Weather station shows wind at 5 to 8 knots from the southwest, temperature 72 degrees, humidity at 68%. Atmospheric pressure is steady at 30.05 inches. Perfect conditions, Garrett observed. Light wind, good visibility, stable pressure. If we're going to attempt something ambitious, this is the day for it. Sarah found herself studying the lighthouse through high-powered spotting scopes that had been set up on the firing line. At maximum magnification, she could make out individual stones in the lighthouse structure and the detail of the observation platform near the top. 3,285 meters confirmed, Davies announced, lowering his range-finding equipment. The lady was spot on with her measurement. A small crowd had begun to gather as word spread about the impromptu long-range shooting demonstration. Several Marine snipers had appeared, along with a few officers who seemed curious about the unusual morning activities. Sarah felt increasingly self-conscious as more people arrived to watch. "So here's what I'm thinking," Garrett said, his competitive instincts clearly engaged. "We need a visible target at that distance. The lighthouse itself is too large to provide meaningful precision measurement." Davies nodded toward the communication equipment. "I've arranged for someone to position a standardized target at the base of the lighthouse. 12-inch square, high-contrast design. Should be visible through our optics if the light is right." Sarah watched through the spotting scope as a small military vehicle approached the lighthouse. Within minutes, she could see a bright orange and black target being positioned against the white lighthouse wall. Even at extreme distance, the target was clearly visible through the high-quality optics. 12 inches at 3,300 meters, she calculated aloud. That's roughly a third of a minute of angle. Extremely challenging even under perfect conditions. One of the observing Marines overheard her comment. "You sound like you know something about long-range ballistics, ma'am." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks again. "I do some recreational shooting. Nothing at this level, obviously." Davies had been making calculations on the ballistic computer. "Flight time will be approximately 4.2 seconds. Bullet drop is going to be massive, probably close to 400 inches if my math is right." 412 inches, Garrett corrected, checking his own calculations. "That's over 34 feet of drop. The optics will need to be adjusted significantly." Sarah found herself drawn into the technical discussion despite her nervousness. Wind drift is going to be the real challenge. Even a slight change in conditions during that 4-second flight time could throw the shot off by several feet. The two soldiers looked at her with renewed interest. Her understanding of long-range ballistics was clearly more sophisticated than they'd initially realized. "Exactly right," Davies agreed. "This isn't just about rifle accuracy. It's about reading conditions, making calculations, and maintaining focus under pressure." A Marine captain approached their position. "I understand we're attempting some extreme distance shooting today. Mind if I observe? It's not often we see anyone willing to try shots at this range." "Not at all, sir," Garrett replied. "Though I should mention that we're hoping to have multiple shooters attempt the shot. Different approaches to the same challenge." The captain's gaze settled on Sarah. "Multiple shooters? Are you planning to participate, ma'am?" Sarah felt every eye on the range focus on her. This was the moment she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for a shot at this level." "What's your background?" the captain asked directly. "Marine biology consultant for the base, sir. But I do competitive shooting as a hobby. Mostly out to 600 or 700 meters." Davy stepped forward. "She builds her own rifles and shoots sub-MOA groups at 600 meters. I'd say she's more qualified than most people would be for this kind of challenge." The captain looked intrigued. "Custom gunsmithing and sub-MOA accuracy? That's serious marksmanship. What's the longest shot you've ever attempted?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was clearly beyond the point where she could gracefully withdraw from the challenge. 800 meters, sir. I made a successful hit on a 10-inch target at that distance last month at a civilian competition." A murmur of approval ran through the growing crowd of observers. 800 meters was considered expert-level marksmanship in most circles, though it was still far short of the challenge they were contemplating. "Well then," the captain said with a slight smile, "it sounds like we have 3 qualified shooters willing to attempt something truly ambitious. This should be interesting." Garrett began setting up the first rifle, adjusting the scope mounts, and checking the bore alignment. "Who wants to go first? We should probably start with ranging shots to confirm our ballistic calculations." "I'll take the first attempt," Davies volunteered. British precision, as promised. Sarah watched as Davies settled behind the rifle, his movements economical and professional. He spent several minutes adjusting his position, checking wind conditions through the spotting scope, and making fine adjustments to the rifle settings. The range fell silent as everyone focused on the distant target. "Wind is steady at 6 knots southwest," one of the Marine spotters reported. "Light conditions are stable." Davies chambered around and settled into his shooting position. Sarah could see the intense concentration on his face as he controlled his breathing and found his natural point of aim. The seconds stretched as he made final adjustments to his sight picture. The rifle's report was sharp and authoritative, echoing across the range. Everyone immediately turned to the spotting scopes to track the bullet's impact. The flight time seemed endless as they waited for the result. Impact visible, the spotter called out. Low and left, approximately 6 feet from target center. A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the observers. Davies had missed the target, but his shot had been remarkably close considering the extreme distance and challenging conditions. Excellent first attempt, the captain commented. 6 feet off target at that distance is outstanding shooting. Davies stepped back from the rifle, his expression thoughtful. Wind caught the bullet more than I calculated. Need to adjust for increased drift. Garrett moved forward to take his turn. Sarah watched as he went through his own preparation routine, making adjustments based on Davies' shot while accounting for any changes in conditions. His approach was slightly different, more methodical in his wind reading and scope adjustment. The second shot rang out across the range. Again, all eyes turned to the spotting scopes as they waited for the impact assessment. Impact visible, the spotter announced. High and right, approximately 4 feet from target center. This shot had been even closer than the first attempt. The crowd of observers was clearly impressed by the level of marksmanship they were witnessing. Sarah realized that all eyes were now turning to her. It was her turn to attempt the impossible shot, using equipment she'd never handled before, at a distance beyond anything she'd ever tried. Her mouth felt dry as she approached the rifle. Take your time, Garrett advised quietly. Use what you learned from watching our shots. The rifle is zeroed and the conditions are steady. Sarah settled behind the weapon, immediately struck by how different it felt from her own rifle. The .338 Lapua was heavier, with a different balance point and trigger feel. She would have to adapt quickly to equipment that was completely unfamiliar. She spent several minutes familiarizing herself with the rifle's characteristics, checking the scope alignment, and getting a feel for the trigger. Through the powerful optics, the distant target seemed both impossibly far away and tantalizingly achievable. Adjust your scope up 34 feet for bullet drop, Davies suggested. And remember to account for the wind drift we observed. Sarah made the suggested adjustments, her mind automatically running through ballistic calculations she'd learned through years of precision shooting. The mathematics were familiar, even if the distances were unprecedented. As she settled into her shooting position, Sarah felt the familiar calm that always descended during precision shooting. Her breathing slowed and steadied. Her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to the scope reticle and the distant target. The lighthouse stood waiting in the distance, holding its challenge for anyone brave enough to accept it. The weight of expectation pressed down on Sarah as she settled behind the unfamiliar rifle. Every person on the range had fallen silent, creating an atmosphere of intense anticipation. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her every movement, waiting to see if the quiet marine biologist could match the performance of two elite military snipers. Through the high-powered scope, the target at the lighthouse base appeared as a small orange and black square against the white stone wall. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly and steadily as she had been taught years ago by her father. The fundamentals never changed, regardless of distance or pressure. Wind holding steady at 6 knots southwest, the marine spotter reported in a quiet voice. No significant changes in the last 5 minutes. Sarah nodded slightly, processing the information while maintaining her sight picture. She had observed both previous shots carefully, noting how the wind had affected each bullet's trajectory. Davies had underestimated the drift, while Garrett had overcorrected slightly. She needed to find the middle ground between their adjustments. The .338 Lapua Magnum cartridge was significantly more powerful than anything she had ever fired. Her research into the ballistics told her it would maintain supersonic velocity throughout the entire flight to the target, but the 4-second journey would still allow plenty of time for environmental factors to influence the bullet's path. Sarah made a final adjustment to her scope, accounting for what she had learned from the previous shots. Her finger found the trigger's first stage, and she felt the familiar resistance that told her exactly where the break point would be. Everything felt different with this military-grade equipment, but the principles remained the same. Rifle is ready, she announced quietly, following the range protocol she had observed. Captain Morrison, who had been watching through his own spotting scope, gave her a nod of encouragement. Take your shot when ready, ma'am. No pressure except what you put on yourself. Sarah appreciated the captain's attempt to ease her nerves, but She knew that everyone present was intensely curious to see how a civilian would perform under these extreme conditions. She had already exceeded expectations just by demonstrating knowledge of long-range ballistics. But actually making the shot would be something entirely different. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate settle into the steady rhythm that indicated optimal physiological conditions for precision shooting. Her body relaxed into the rifle's stock, finding the natural point of aim that would require minimal muscular tension to maintain. Years of practice had ingrained these fundamentals so deeply that they occurred almost automatically. Through the scope, Sarah could see heat waves beginning to shimmer off the asphalt near the lighthouse as the morning temperature rose. These atmospheric conditions would affect bullet trajectory in subtle but measurable ways. She made a tiny adjustment to compensate for the changing air density. The crosshairs settled on the target's center point. Sarah began her final breathing sequence, inhaling deeply and then exhaling halfway before holding her breath in the natural respiratory pause that provided the steadiest shooting position. Her finger moved through the trigger's first stage and found the break point. Time seemed to slow as Sarah applied steady rearward pressure to the trigger. She maintained perfect sight alignment while following through with her trigger pull, keeping the crosshairs centered on target throughout the rifle's recoil cycle. The .338 Lapua's report was thunderous, echoing across the range and out over the Pacific Ocean. Every person on the firing line immediately turned their attention to spotting scopes and binoculars, trying to track the bullet's impact at the distant lighthouse. Sarah remained in position behind the rifle, maintaining her sight picture through the scope's powerful magnification. She could see the target clearly, but the bullet's impact point would be too small to observe at this distance without specialized equipment. The seconds stretched endlessly as the bullet flew its 4-second journey across the coastal terrain. Sarah found herself holding her breath again, not from shooting technique, but from pure anticipation. She had either made a shot that few people could achieve, or she had missed entirely in front of an audience of military professionals. Impact visible, the Marine spotter called out, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an undercurrent of excitement. Stand by for assessment. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she waited for the verdict. Around her, she could hear hushed conversations and the sound of range equipment being adjusted for better target observation. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Confirmed hit, the spotter announced, and Sarah could hear the amazement in his voice. Clean impact, approximately 18 inches right of center mass. A collective gasp went up from the observers. Sarah had not only hit the 12-inch target at over 3,000 meters, but she had come remarkably close to dead center. The margin of error was well within acceptable parameters for such an extreme shot. Captain Morrison lowered his spotting scope and turned to look at Sarah with undisguised respect. Outstanding marksmanship, ma'am. That was an exceptional shot under challenging conditions. Sarah felt a wave of relief and elation wash over her as she carefully made the rifle safe and stepped back from the firing position. The congratulations and praise from the military observers felt surreal, as if she were experiencing someone else's accomplishment. Davies approached with an expression of genuine admiration. That was brilliant shooting. I have to admit, I wasn't entirely certain a civilian would be able to adapt to military equipment quickly enough to make a shot like that. The fundamentals are the same regardless of the equipment, Sarah replied, though she was still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Good fundamentals and careful observation of conditions. Garrett shook his head with a rueful smile. She outshot both of us with a rifle she'd never handled before. I'm impressed and slightly embarrassed at the same time. Word of the successful shot was already spreading beyond the immediate group of observers. Sarah could see Marines approaching from other parts of the range complex, drawn by news that someone had successfully engaged a target at over 3,000 meters. She found herself at the center of growing attention that felt both thrilling and overwhelming. A master sergeant approached Captain Morrison and spoke quietly with him for several minutes. Sarah couldn't hear their conversation, but she noticed them both glancing in her direction several times. Their discussion seemed serious, and she wondered if her presence on a military range as a civilian was creating complications. Ma'am, Captain Morrison called her over. Master Sergeant Phillips here has an interesting proposition for you. Sarah approached the two Marines somewhat nervously. Master Sergeant Phillips was a lean man with steel-gray eyes, and the bearing of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of precision marksmanship. "Ms. Mitchell," Phillips began, "your shot this morning demonstrates exceptional skill with long-range precision rifles. Captain Morrison tells me you're a contractor working with the base on environmental projects." "That's correct, Master Sergeant. Marine biology consulting, primarily focused on coastal ecosystem impacts from training activities." Phillips nodded thoughtfully. "We occasionally have need for civilian specialists who can assist with specialized projects. Your demonstrated marksmanship ability, combined with your scientific background and existing security clearance, presents some interesting possibilities." Sarah felt her curiosity intensify. What kind of specialized projects? "Range safety and environmental assessment for extreme long-range shooting exercises," Captain Morrison explained. "We're developing new training protocols for scout sniper teams that require precise environmental monitoring and safety oversight at distances beyond our current standard procedures." Master Sergeant Phillips continued, "Your successful shot this morning, along with your scientific credentials, suggests you might be uniquely qualified to help develop these protocols. The work would involve both technical consultation and practical demonstration of long-range marksmanship techniques." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this unexpected opportunity. The combination of her scientific training and newly demonstrated shooting ability had apparently created a skill set that the military found valuable. The position would require additional security clearance and specialized training, Phillips added. "But, if you're interested, we could explore the possibility of expanding your existing contract to include this type of work." Davies, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward. "I should mention that this type of specialized consulting work often involves collaboration with allied military forces. International training exchanges, joint development of marksmanship protocols, that sort of thing." Sarah realized that her morning shell collecting expedition had somehow evolved into a potential career opportunity she had never imagined. The successful shot at the lighthouse had opened doors she didn't even know existed. "I'd be very interested in learning more about this opportunity," she said carefully. "Though I have to admit, this morning has been full of surprises." Captain Morrison smiled. "I imagine it has been. Why don't we head back to the base headquarters and discuss the details? Master Sergeant Phillips can brief you on what this type of work would involve." As they gathered up the shooting equipment and prepared to leave the range, Sarah took one last look at the lighthouse standing in the distance. The target was barely visible as a tiny speck against the white stone wall, but she knew she had hit it with a precision that few people could achieve. The morning had started with simple shell collecting and somehow transformed into a demonstration of abilities she hadn't known she possessed. Now it appeared to be leading toward opportunities she had never considered. Sarah clutched her bag of shells and wondered what other surprises the day might hold. The base headquarters conference room felt starkly different from the informal atmosphere of the shooting range. Sarah sat across from Master Sergeant Phillips and Captain Morrison, with Davies and Garrett flanking the table as the discussion moved into details that surprised her with their complexity and scope. The Advanced Marksmanship Development Program is a joint initiative between U.S. Marine Corps, British Special Air Service, and several other allied special operations units, Master Sergeant Phillips explained, sliding a folder across the table. "We're developing training protocols for extreme long-range precision shooting that will become standard across multiple military organizations." Sarah opened the folder to find technical specifications, ballistic charts, and training curricula that represented months or years of development work. The scope of the program was far more extensive than she had imagined when the conversation began. "The challenge we face," Captain Morrison continued, "is that traditional range safety and environmental assessment protocols weren't designed for shots beyond 2,000 meters. We need someone who understands both the scientific aspects of long-range ballistics and the practical requirements of extreme precision shooting." Davies leaned forward in his chair. "What happened this morning demonstrates exactly the kind of expertise we've been looking for. You adapted to unfamiliar equipment, made accurate ballistic calculations under pressure, and executed a shot that most trained snipers would find challenging." Sarah studied the documents more carefully, noting the technical complexity of what they were proposing. This would involve developing new safety protocols for shooting at distances up to 4,000 meters. Initially, yes, Phillips confirmed. Eventually, we hope to extend effective engagement ranges even further. The technology exists to make shots at 5,000 meters or beyond, but we need better understanding of environmental factors and safety considerations. Garrett added, the program also involves training international military personnel. What you demonstrated today would be valuable not just for protocol development, but for actual instruction of advanced marksmanship techniques. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she processed the implications. I'm honored by your confidence, but I should point out that my longest successful shot before today was 800 meters. I'm hardly qualified to train military snipers. Actually, Captain Morrison said with a slight smile, your background makes you more qualified than most people would be. Military snipers are taught to follow established procedures and protocols. What we need for this program is someone who can think scientifically about extreme-range shooting and develop new approaches to challenges we haven't faced before. Master Sergeant Phillips pulled out another set of documents. The position would require secret security clearance, which your existing contractor status makes relatively straightforward. Training would include advanced ballistics, meteorology, range safety management, and specialized marksmanship instruction. Davies gestured toward the window, where the lighthouse was visible in the distance. Today's shot proves you have the fundamental skills needed. The advanced training would build on that foundation to prepare you for working at even more extreme distances. Sarah found herself studying a technical diagram showing ballistic trajectories for various cartridges at distances up to 6,000 meters. The mathematics involved were staggering, with bullet flight times approaching 8 seconds and environmental factors that could affect accuracy in dozens of different ways. How long would the training program take? She asked. 6 months of intensive instruction, Phillips replied. 3 months at Quantico working with Marine Corps precision shooting instructors, followed by 3 months at various Allied military facilities, including Hereford in the UK and specialized ranges in Germany and Australia. The scope of the opportunity was almost overwhelming. Sarah had gone from collecting shells on a beach to being offered international training with the world's most elite military units. It felt like something from a movie rather than real life. The compensation would reflect the specialized nature of the work, Captain Morrison added, sliding another document across the table. Consultant rates for this type of expertise are quite generous. Sarah glanced at the salary figures and felt her eyebrows rise involuntarily. The numbers were significantly higher than her current marine biology consulting income, even accounting for the increased responsibility and security requirements. There's another aspect of the program you should know about, Davies said, his expression becoming more serious. Part of our mission involves supporting special operations units in theater. The extreme long-range shooting techniques we're developing have real-world applications for special reconnaissance and counterterrorism operations. Phillips nodded gravely. This isn't just academic research. The protocols and training methods you would help develop could directly impact the effectiveness and safety of military personnel in combat situations. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. What had begun as a demonstration of marksmanship skill was evolving into work that could affect the lives of soldiers in harm's way. I need to understand exactly what my role would involve, she said carefully. Would I be expected to deploy with military units or work exclusively in training environments? Training environments only, Captain Morrison assured her. Your role would be developing protocols, training instructors, and providing scientific assessment of extreme-range shooting challenges. No deployment to combat zones would be required or expected. Garrett leaned back in his chair. Though I should mention that the training locations can be quite challenging. Some of the ranges we use for extreme long-range work are in remote areas with difficult environmental conditions. Desert ranges in Arizona, mountain facilities in Colorado, even Arctic training areas in Alaska. Davies added, the international aspect also means adapting to different military cultures and training methods. British approaches to marksmanship differ from American techniques, and other Allied forces have their own specialized methods. Sarah found herself imagining training scenarios in exotic locations around the world, working with elite military units to push the boundaries of human marksmanship capability. The scientist in her was fascinated by the technical challenges, while the competitive shooter in her was thrilled by the opportunity to work at the absolute cutting edge of precision shooting. "What would be my timeline for making a decision?" she asked. "The next training cycle begins in 6 weeks," Master Sergeant Phillips replied. "We'd need a commitment within 2 weeks to arrange security clearance processing and preliminary briefings." Captain Morrison stood up and moved to the window overlooking the range complex. "I should mention that this morning's events have attracted attention beyond our immediate program. Word of your shot has already reached some very senior people who are interested in the implications for future military training development." Sarah felt a chill of nervousness mixed with excitement. What kind of senior people? Pentagon officials responsible for special operations training, allied military liaisons, defense contractors working on advanced weapons systems, Davies enumerated. "Your demonstration today solved a problem that multiple organizations have been working on for years." Master Sergeant Phillips gathered up the documents and placed them back in the folder. "Why don't you take this information home and review it carefully? Discuss it with your family, consider the implications for your current career, and let us know your decision when you're ready." Sarah accepted the folder, noting its substantial weight. "I appreciate the opportunity and the confidence you're showing in my abilities. This is definitely not what I expected when I went shell collecting this morning." Garrett grinned. "The best opportunities often come when you least expect them. Your combination of scientific training and practical marksmanship skills is exactly what this program needs." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Captain Morrison turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "One final thought for you to consider. This program represents a chance to contribute to military capabilities in ways that could save lives and protect national security. It's not just about pushing the boundaries of marksmanship technology." Davies nodded in agreement. "The techniques and protocols we develop here will be used by the most elite military units in the world. Your scientific approach to extreme-range shooting could revolutionize how special operations forces engage targets in critical situations." Sarah left the base headquarters with her mind spinning from the magnitude of the opportunity presented to her. The folder under her arm contained detailed information about a career path she had never imagined, offering challenges and responsibilities that would push her abilities in directions she hadn't known were possible. The morning sun had given way to afternoon clouds as she walked back toward the beach where her day had started. The lighthouse stood unchanged in the distance, but everything else about her world had been fundamentally altered by a single shot that had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood once again on the beach at Camp Pendleton, but this time she wasn't alone. Her father, retired Marine Colonel James Mitchell, walked beside her as she retraced the path where her life had changed so dramatically. The morning fog was burning off under the California sun, revealing the same lighthouse that had become the focal point of her most significant accomplishment. "So this is where it all started," her father observed, his experienced eyes taking in the tactical aspects of the terrain. "Good natural shooting position, stable ground, clear sight lines. I can see why they chose this location for extreme range work." Sarah smiled at his automatic assessment of the area's military potential. Even 15 years after retirement, Colonel Mitchell still evaluated every location through the lens of tactical application. It was a habit that had served him well during his career and had influenced Sarah's own methodical approach to problem-solving. "I still can't quite believe it happened," Sarah admitted, adjusting the strap of her collection bag. One conversation about shell measurements turned into a career opportunity one never imagined. They had spent the previous evening going through every detail of the Advanced Marksmanship Development Program offer. Colonel Mitchell had read through all the technical specifications, security requirements, and training schedules with the thoroughness of someone who understood the implications of military service better than most civilians ever could. "The opportunity is legitimate and significant," he had concluded after his review. "This type of specialized consulting work is exactly what the military needs as technology advances beyond current training protocols. Your unique combination of scientific training and practical marksmanship gives you capabilities that few people possess." Now, as they walked the beach where it had all begun, Sarah found herself processing the decision she had already made but not yet announced. The folder from Master Sergeant Phillips sat on her kitchen table at home, filled out with her acceptance forms and ready for submission. "Dad," she said, stopping to face him directly, "I'm going to accept the position." Colonel Mitchell studied her face carefully, reading the determination and excitement in her expression. "You've thought this through completely? Understood all the implications and commitments involved?" "As completely as anyone can understand a path they've never walked before," Sarah replied. "But, yes, I've considered everything. The training timeline, the security requirements, the international travel, the responsibility. This is something I want to do." Her father nodded slowly. "Then, you have my full support. You've demonstrated abilities that most people will never possess, and this program will push those abilities to their absolute limits. It won't be easy, but you've never backed down from a challenge." They continued walking toward the lighthouse, passing the spot where Sarah had first encountered Davies and Garrett 3 weeks earlier. The base had arranged for her to have continued access to the extreme long-range shooting facilities, and she had been practicing regularly to maintain the skills that had impressed the military observers. "Master Sergeant Phillips called yesterday," Sarah mentioned. "They've accelerated the timeline for the next training cycle. I would start at Quantico in 4 weeks instead of 6. "Any particular reason for the acceleration?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to share the information she had been given. "Apparently, word of my shot has reached some very senior levels. There's increased interest in fast-tracking the development of extreme-range protocols." Colonel Mitchell's expression became more serious. "That kind of high-level attention brings both opportunities and pressure. You'll be under scrutiny from people who expect exceptional performance." "I know," Sarah acknowledged. "But Davies mentioned that several other allied militaries want to send representatives to observe the training program. My demonstration has apparently sparked international interest in American extreme-range marksmanship capabilities." They had reached the base of the lighthouse, where the target from 3 weeks earlier had been positioned. Sarah could see the small impact mark where her bullet had struck, a tiny crater in the concrete that marked one of the most significant moments of her life. 18 inches off-center at 3,300 meters, her father observed, examining the impact point. "Outstanding precision under pressure. I'm proud of what you accomplished here." Sarah felt a surge of emotion at her father's words. His approval meant more to her than all the congratulations from military personnel and defense contractors who had contacted her since news of the shot had spread through official channels. "The shot opened doors I didn't know existed," she said. "But it also created expectations I'm not sure I can meet consistently." Colonel Mitchell turned to face her directly. "Consistency comes from perfect practice and continuous improvement. The fundamentals that made that shot possible are the same fundamentals that will serve you throughout this new career. Trust your training, adapt to new challenges, and never stop learning." His advice carried the weight of decades of military experience and successful leadership. Sarah had grown up hearing similar guidance, but it felt different now that she was about to embark on a path that would test everything he had taught her. Captain Morrison mentioned that the program has attracted interest from defense contractors working on advanced weapons systems, Sarah shared. "Apparently, the ballistic data from extreme-range shots like mine is valuable for developing new technology." "That doesn't surprise me," her father replied. "Military technology development often depends on human performance data to establish realistic parameters for new systems. Your scientific background will be particularly valuable in that kind of research." They began walking back toward the base entrance, where Sarah's truck was parked next to the visitor center. The morning had served its purpose of helping her process the magnitude of the decision she had made and gain her father's perspective on the challenges ahead. "When do you plan to submit your acceptance?" Colonel Mitchell asked as they approached the parking area. "This afternoon," Sarah replied. "Master Sergeant Phillips wants to begin preliminary security clearance processing as soon as possible." Her father stopped and extended his hand formally. "Then, congratulations, Dr. Mitchell. You're about to begin an adventure that few people ever have the opportunity to experience." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the significance of the moment. In a few hours, she would officially commit to a path that would take her around the world, working with elite military units to push the boundaries of human marksmanship capability. As she drove away from Camp Pendleton, Sarah caught a final glimpse of the lighthouse in her rearview mirror. The structure stood unchanged, but it now represented the beginning of something extraordinary rather than simply a navigational landmark. Her bag of shells sat on the passenger seat, a reminder of how her morning had started 3 weeks earlier. She had been a marine biologist collecting specimens for research, living a quiet life focused on scientific inquiry and weekend shooting competitions. Now she was about to become a military consultant specializing in extreme-range marksmanship development, with responsibilities that could affect special operations capabilities around the world. The transformation seemed almost impossible to believe, but the evidence was undeniable. One conversation about distance measurements had led to a demonstration of abilities she hadn't known she possessed, which had opened opportunities that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her own potential. That evening, Sarah submitted her acceptance forms electronically and received an immediate confirmation from Master Sergeant Phillips. The Advanced Marksmanship Development Program would begin her training in 26 days, starting with intensive ballistics instruction at Quantico and culminating with international training exercises at Allied military facilities. She stood on her apartment balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the darkening water. In less than a month, she would begin a journey that would take her far from this familiar coast. But the foundation for everything that followed had been built on this beach with a single shot that exceeded everyone's expectations. The shells from that morning still sat in a display case on her desk, a tangible reminder of how quickly life could change when opportunity met preparation. Sarah had been ready for the challenge without knowing it existed, and now she was prepared to discover just how far her newfound abilities could take her. Tomorrow would bring final preparations for a career she had never planned but somehow always been training for. The quiet marine biologist who collected shells on empty beaches was about to become something entirely new, shaped by precision and purpose in ways she was only beginning to understand.